Welcome, traveler of the sleepless hours. You've wandered into the quiet between dreams, where the night doesn't end and the light never quite begins. So settle in, turn off whatever hums around you, and listen, because once this story starts, you might wish you hadn't. Story 1. A few years back, I decided to make the long drive from my hometown in western Colorado to visit an old friend in San Francisco. It wasn't my first road trip, but it was the first time I'd be crossing the Utah desert alone. My plan was simple: leave early, drive straight through Utah, stop overnight at a small inn in Nevada, and finish the trip the next morning. 1,000 miles of asphalt, radio static, and bad coffee. Easy enough, or so I thought. By the time I hit the Utah border, the air outside had turned thin and colorless. The kind of stillness that eats sound. I'd grown up surrounded by mountains, by trees that whispered when the wind passed. But Utah was different. Endless stretches of pale dirt and heat-shimmered horizon. No birds, no houses, just that road cutting through the earth like a scar. Hours passed. My music faded to background noise, then to silence when the station dropped out. I drove through a place called Delta, a small town that seemed to exist solely because the highway demanded a gas station somewhere. I remember passing it and thinking I'd stop later, maybe in the next town, but later came fast. 40 minutes later, my gas gauge dipped lower than I liked. A cold pulse went through me, the kind that says, you messed up. For miles, there was nothing, not even a billboard. Just the sun lowering behind me and that empty horizon stretching on forever. Then, like a miracle, a sign appeared. It was old, sun-bleached, and leaning at an angle. It said, "Last chance gas, 5 miles." I laughed, actually laughed out loud. I remember saying, "Thank God," to no one. 5 miles felt like salvation. The road curved slightly, and soon I could make out a cluster of buildings clinging to the highway's edge. They looked like they'd been forgotten there, weathered by time and sand. The gas station sat at the entrance of what might have once been a small town, maybe a dozen buildings total, their roofs sagging under years of neglect. I pulled into the station. Gravel crunched beneath my tires. There were no other cars, no sound but the faint moan of wind sweeping through the empty streets. The pumps looked ancient, big metal beasts with faded paint and analog dials. When I grabbed the nozzle, it felt heavy, solid. But when I tried to pump, nothing came out. I tried again, tapped the side, still nothing. I figured maybe the station still had an attendant inside, someone who'd show me the trick to coaxing life from that old machine. So I walked toward the little convenience store attached to the pumps. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and a small bell above it rang with a flat, metallic sound that felt too loud for the silence outside. Inside, it was like stepping back in time. The shelves were dusty but neatly stocked. Bags of chips and candy bars printed with logos I hadn't seen since childhood. A soda cooler hummed faintly, though the glass was fogged from the inside. Behind the counter sat a massive old register, the kind made entirely of iron, with keys that could probably break a finger if you hit them wrong. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded strange, swallowed by the room. No answer. I waited a few seconds before walking farther in. A calendar behind the counter caught my eye. It showed June 2001. That didn't make sense. It was 2009. The newspaper folded beside the register was from that same week. Something about that stopped me cold. I turned toward the back door, which hung slightly ajar. Beyond it was a small office, maybe a break room. A mug sat beside an old radio, the coffee inside dry to a brown crust. A jacket hung neatly on the back of a chair. It looked like someone had stepped out for a smoke and never came back. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the kind before a storm. I backed out slowly and returned to the front, half expecting someone to appear and laugh at me for trespassing. But there was only silence. Through the window, I could see a small playground across the street. 2 swings moved gently, though the wind had died. No children, no people, just those swings moving, as if someone had left them moments ago. I should have gotten in my car and left. Any sensible person would have. But curiosity, that's the thing that ruins you. I walked across the street. Every door I tried was locked. Windows were layered in grime, hiding whatever waited inside. One house had its front door open an inch. Against my better judgment, I pushed it. The air inside was stale, unmoving. It was as though time had frozen mid-breath. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the table, now shriveled and blackened. A glass of something, milk maybe, had turned to crust. A book lay open on the couch, its spine cracked like it had been left there for years. Upstairs, the floor creaked under my weight. I stepped into a child's room where toys were scattered mid-play. Plastic soldiers, a doll missing an arm, a puzzle half-finished. A single curtain fluttered beside a window that looked out on the empty street. That was when I finally felt it. The certainty that I wasn't supposed to be there. I backed out fast, my heart beat loud in my ears. As I descended the stairs, a thought burned through my panic. What if they're all still here, just hiding? Watching? Outside again, the town looked the same. But now it felt different. Alive, in a quiet, hateful way. Like the air itself was aware of me. I hurried to my car. My hand shook as I fumbled with the keys. When the engine roared to life, the sound nearly made me cry with relief. I didn't even look back at the town as I pulled away. The gas gauge still hovered near empty. I knew I might not make it to the next town, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. For nearly an hour, I drove with the radio hissing nothing but static. No phone signal, no light except the fading orange line of sunset ahead. Then, finally, civilization. A chevron sign glowing like a lighthouse in the dark. I coasted in on fumes, heart still hammering. Inside the station, I filled my tank and felt my phone flicker to life with a few bars of service. I didn't want to stand outside to make a call. The old sign still warned against using phones near the pumps. So I went inside to ask the clerk if I could use theirs. The clerk, a young guy maybe my age, looked at me like I'd been dug out of a cave. I told him about the gas station in the town just east of here. He frowned, said he didn't know any town like that on Route 50. Nothing there for years, he said. Just desert. But when I mentioned a name, the word Milberg, which I'd seen faintly painted on one of the buildings, his face changed. He didn't say anything, just handed me a phone book and pointed to the sheriff's office in Millard County. When the deputy answered, his tone told me everything. He knew the place. He called it Milberg, too. Said it had been abandoned for years, though no one seemed to remember exactly why. Something about legal issues with the land. He didn't sound alarmed, just careful, like someone choosing each word for a reason. And when I asked what had happened there, he went quiet. After a long pause, the deputy finally said, "Nothing to worry about. Just one of those towns that dried up and blew away." His voice was steady, but there was something behind it, like he was forcing calm. I pressed a little, asking when it happened, why the place still looked lived in. He chuckled softly, though it didn't sound like amusement. "You must have stopped in Milberg," he said. "That place has been empty a long time. Don't let it get in your head. But it already had. He told me the town had been scheduled for demolition, but red tape had slowed the process. Some developer had bought the land, then vanished when the permits stalled. Nothing sinister, he said, just bureaucratic decay. The kind of thing that leaves places forgotten on maps. Still, something about his tone made me uneasy. Too neat, too rehearsed. When I asked him why it had been abandoned, the line went quiet again. Then he asked, "You a journalist or something?" "No," I said. "Just a traveler who nearly ran out of gas." He exhaled, and I could almost hear him deciding something. "If you want to talk about it," he said, "come to our office in Fillmore. Easier to explain face to face." I said I'd think about it, thanked him, and hung up. But I couldn't shake the feeling that his invitation wasn't really an invitation at all. More like a test to see if I'd actually show up. That night, in my motel room, I replayed everything. The faded candy, wrappers, the swing that moved without wind, the child's room, the untouched cup of coffee. It all spun together until I started wondering whether I'd imagined some of it. Exhaustion does strange things to the mind, especially in the desert. Still, I couldn't let it go. When I finally met my friend in San Francisco, I told him the whole thing. He listened quietly, then shrugged it off like people do when they don't want to share your fear. He said, "Yeah, maybe something bad happened there. But if the sheriff's office isn't worried, you shouldn't be either. You just stopped in the wrong ghost town, that's all." Maybe he was right. But late that night, lying awake, I kept picturing that coat draped over the chair, the calendar stuck on June 2001. I thought about the silence of the radio, the kind of silence that isn't empty but listening. For a few days, I managed to forget about it. San Francisco was loud, bright, and full of motion. The city drowned out my thoughts. But then the trip ended, and I had to make the drive home. The same route, the same desert. I debated taking a detour north to avoid Milberg entirely. But it would have added 3 hours. I convinced myself I was being dramatic. Whatever that place was, it couldn't hurt me. It was just a cluster of old wood and rust, no different from 100 other ghost towns across the West. Still, I made sure to fill my tank before leaving Nevada. I wasn't about to risk stopping anywhere near that place again. By the time I reached the Utah line, the horizon was dimming into dusk. The air looked bruised, the colors fading into gray. As I crested a hill, I saw it. The shape of Milberg in the distance, crouched low against the desert floor. Even from miles away, I recognized the tilted gas station sign. My foot pressed down harder on the pedal. The car surged forward, the engine's roar filling the cabin. I didn't look at the buildings as they blurred past, didn't glance toward the playground or the crooked rooftops. I just kept my eyes on the road ahead. For 3 heartbeats, I was inside Milberg again. And in those seconds, something shifted at the edge of my vision. A light. It flickered in one of the windows, soft, pale, like the glow of a lantern or a television, far too faint to belong in a dead town. I blinked, and it was gone. Maybe a reflection, maybe not. I drove until my hands ached from gripping the wheel. When I finally stopped, the town was miles behind me, but the silence inside the car felt heavier than before. That night, I stayed in a motel near the state line, same chain as before. As I checked in, the clerk looked up from his desk and said, "Long drive?" "Yeah," I answered. "Just trying to make it home." He smiled, said, "Route 50's rough that way. Not much between here and Delta." My stomach turned. I asked as casually as I could, "You ever hear of a place called Milberg?" The smile dropped from his face like a curtain. He looked at me for a long time before shaking his head. "No," he said quietly. "Not around here." Then he turned back to his computer, pretending to type. I didn't push. That night, I dreamed of that town, of the bell above the gas station door ringing in a windless silence, of the child's toys scattered across the floor, of the swing moving by itself, and in the dream, someone was standing at the edge of the street. Too far to see clearly, but close enough to know I was being watched. When I woke, the world was still dark. I turned on the bedside lamp and found my phone face down on the nightstand. The screen glowed faintly, and for a split second before it lit fully, I saw something. An image that shouldn't have been there. A photo, my car, parked in front of the Millburg gas station. Then the screen flickered, and it was gone. Just a glitch, I told myself. Just a trick of sleep and memory. But as I drove home that day, every mile felt longer than it should. The sky seemed lower, the air colder. By the time I reached Colorado, it felt like something unseen had followed me all the way back. I told myself I'd forget Millburg, like my friend suggested. Pretend it never existed. But sometimes when I drive at night and see a cluster of old lights on a distant horizon, I catch myself staring too long, waiting to see if that same faded sign will rise from the dark again. And if it does, I don't think I'll stop this time, not even for gas. Story 2. My granddaddy was a Texas Ranger back during the Great Depression. I never knew him well. He passed when I was just a kid. But my dad used to tell me stories. Some were funny, some were grim, but this one always stuck with me. Cochran County back then was crawling with trouble. The Depression made desperate men do desperate things, and West Texas had more than its fair share. Banks were being robbed almost daily. Morton, Whiteface, Bledsoe. Every week, a new holdup, another headline. Folks started saying our county was the bank robbery capital of the state. Some of those crooks tried to make a run for the New Mexico line, thinking they could vanish into the desert. But the feds caught on fast, set up roadblocks near Tatum, and most who tried it ended up in cuffs. Still, plenty got away, more than my granddaddy liked. There was one in particular, a man who'd shot a young female clerk during a robbery gone wrong. My granddaddy took that one personal. He and his partner chased leads all across the panhandle until a tip came in from some fella who claimed he'd seen the suspect's getaway car at a rundown place called the Yellow Rose Motel. It sat out in the middle of nowhere, just a strip of faded rooms off a lonely dirt road. Granddaddy and his partner drove out there, dust trailing behind them, and found an old couple running the place. Sweet, polite, just trying to make ends meet. They told him the motel had been lively once before the crash, but by 32, it was mostly empty. Hardly anyone stopped anymore, and when they did, the couple didn't bother keeping records. 50 cents a night, pick your room, leave whenever you pleased. My granddaddy said they were kind as pie, offered coffee, answered every question, even let the ranger search the place. But they swore they'd never seen his suspect, nor the car. Before leaving, he suggested they start keeping a guest log, just in case lawmen ever needed to check again. They promised they would, and that was that. The trail went cold after that visit. Weeks passed, then months, and the name, the Yellow Rose, faded into the background. Until it came up again. Another robbery, another witness. This one claimed they'd seen the same man, same build, same hat, same bag used in a liquor store job, heading into a room at the Yellow Rose. So Granddaddy and his partner saddled up again and rode out. Same couple greeted them, same sweet smiles, same story. They didn't remember much, but when Granddaddy showed them a photo of the suspect, they squinted and said, "He looks familiar, but we can't be sure." At first, the Rangers didn't think much of it. They figured the old-timers were forgetful. But after the third time that motel popped up in connection to a wanted man, something started to feel off. This time, the witness who tipped them off mentioned something odd. The suspect had seemed nervous, pacing around his room and refusing to leave. Said the older man who ran the motel had to go check on him several times. When the Rangers questioned the old man about it, he claimed he didn't remember which guest they were talking about. Granddaddy pressed him, asked if he'd gone inside the suspect's room. The old man said, "No, sir, not once." But something in his eyes didn't match his words. Granddaddy didn't call him out, not yet. He and his partner just nodded, thanked him, and left. But the moment they got in their car, they both knew the couple was lying. His partner thought it was simple enough. The old folks were sheltering fugitives for cash, offering safe passage south, maybe even across the border, in exchange for a hefty cut. "Rent's 50 cents for some," his partner said. "But for others, try 1,500. They just needed proof, and that's the thing. They'd already searched the place, top to bottom twice, and there was nothing. No stolen goods, no strange papers, no hidden rooms. If there was a secret, it was buried deep." Months passed again before the yellow rose surfaced once more. This time, the lead came from a bandit already locked up in Amarillo. He was furious, claimed his partner had left him behind after a job, and stiffed him out of half their take. He told my granddaddy that he and his partner had a plan. If things went south, they'd head for the yellow rose. The old couple there could make a man disappear for the right price. That was all the confirmation the Rangers needed. Granddaddy's partner whooped when he heard it, said, "I damn well knew it." But there was still one question they couldn't answer. How were those old folks helping men disappear? Even the jailed bandit didn't know, said he'd never been inside, just heard rumors about a secret passage, maybe a tunnel leading to the desert. Weeks went by. Every night, Granddaddy sat at his kitchen table going over maps, reports, witness statements. His chief was breathing down his neck, demanding results. Finally, he came up with a plan. They'd send another ranger in undercover, someone the couple hadn't met, a younger man, convincing enough to pass as a crook on the run. They prepped him well. Dirty clothes, fake cash, a stolen revolver planted in his car. The works. He practiced his lines, his nervous twitch, even his drawl. By the time they sent him in, he looked every bit the part. The plan was simple. He'd check in, pretend he'd just robbed a bank, and ask the couple for help disappearing. They waited half a mile away, up on an old water tower, binoculars trained on the motel. When the undercover ranger pulled up, the dust rose in a thick brown cloud. He slammed the car door, ran inside, gesturing wildly, playing the part of a man terrified for his life. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then they saw the old man lead him around back toward the garage. "Here we go," Granddaddy whispered. The plan was that once the couple showed him their trick, whatever it was, he'd draw his gun, arrest them both, and call for backup. They waited. 10 minutes turned to 30, then an hour, then 2. No sign of him. Granddaddy's partner started to fidget. "You think they're testing him?" Granddaddy didn't answer. He just kept watching that little motel baking under the sun, the front porch still and silent. By sunset, they couldn't wait any longer. They radioed in for backup, gathered deputies and federal men, and prepared to storm the place. What they found? Well, that was the part my dad said Granddaddy never talked about again. They came in hard, dust swirling behind a dozen cars. Rangers, deputies, and a pair of federal men from planes, all armed, all tense. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, turning the sky the color of dried blood. Granddaddy led the charge. He kicked the office door open, shouting for everyone to freeze. But the lobby was empty. Just the faint smell of old coffee and the squeak of a ceiling fan turning slow. They cleared the rooms one by one. Empty beds, cracked mirrors, nothing but silence. Then they brought in the dogs. Now these weren't tracking dogs. They were blood dogs, trained to smell one thing only. It didn't take long. The moment they neared the back garage, the animals started whining, scratching at the dirt. There was an old, rusted-out truck back there, half buried in weeds. Looked like it hadn't moved in years, but the dogs wouldn't stop barking at the ground underneath it. The men pushed the truck aside and saw what the dogs were after, a patch of dirt that didn't match the rest. Darker, damp, heavy with the smell of iron. They dug for only a minute before someone's boot hit something hard, a slab of metal. When they swept the dirt away, they found it. A steel hatch, nearly flush with the ground, covered by an old rug that had been pressed flat by years of weight. Granddaddy pried it open. The hinge groaned like something waking up. The air that came out was thick and sour, like rot and chemicals mixed together. He covered his mouth and shined his flashlight down the ladder. What the beam caught made him stop cold. There was a room beneath the motel, a big one. Concrete walls, smooth and dark, lined with shelves. He went down first, his revolver drawn. The others followed, one by one. What they found down there wasn't a hideout. It was something worse. Blood on the floor, a drain cut into the concrete, a hose hanging from a hook, tables with straps, buckets filled with water gone rusty red. In one corner, a workbench cluttered with jars, glass ones, filled with a pale yellowish fluid. Floating in them were pieces of something. Skin, maybe. But that wasn't the part that broke them. At the far end of the bunker, there was another room, its door painted a bright, cheerful yellow. Someone had even stenciled a little rose on it. Granddaddy pushed it open. Inside were 7 figures seated around a poker table. At first, he thought they were alive. Men frozen mid-game, one holding a hand of cards, another with a cigar half raised. But the smell hit him next. Sweet, chemical, oos. Their skin was waxed over, their eyes replaced with glass marbles. Their faces had been painted to look alive, color brushed onto their cheeks. They'd been posed, preserved, and among them sat the undercover ranger. He was dressed just like when they'd sent him in. Same jacket, same hat, same pistol at his hip. Only now, his skin had that same glossy sheen, and his lips were sealed tight with some kind of varnish. He wasn't dead for long, not before they began their work. My dad said that when Granddaddy saw him like that, something inside him cracked. He didn't yell, didn't curse, just stood there, looking at the scene while the other men started gagging, shouting, covering their mouths. The old couple was found in the kitchen upstairs. They didn't even run. The woman sat with her hands folded, the man smoking like it was any other evening. When they saw the Rangers, the woman said, "We didn't mean to hurt anyone." The old man just nodded and added, "They were bad folks, every one of them. We gave them a proper resting place. We cleaned them up, made them presentable." He said it like he was proud of it. They claimed they only killed criminals, that they'd started years ago when the first fugitive came begging for help. Said they were just trying to do God's work, cleansing the earth of sinners. Granddaddy's partner didn't buy a word of it. He slammed the man against the wall, shouting about the ranger they'd murdered. The old man didn't fight back. He just kept repeating, "We didn't know he was one of yours. If we'd known, we'd have let him go." They took both of them into custody. The bunker was sealed off. Evidence gathered. Photographs taken. The story made headlines all over West Texas for a few days, but it never reached beyond that. No big trial. No cameras. The woman died in her sleep before arraignment. Cancer, they said. The old man had a heart attack in his cell 2 weeks later. The yellow rose was torn down not long after. The land sits empty now, though some folks claim nothing grows there anymore. The dirt stays pale, like it's been bleached by something underground. As for my granddaddy, he never was the same. He told my dad once that it should have been him who went undercover, not his partner. Said maybe if he'd done it, that young ranger would still be alive. He started drinking heavy after that. Barely spoke about his time with the rangers. But sometimes, after a few glasses, he'd bring it up again. He'd talk about the smell of that bunker, the way the old man had smiled when they cuffed him, and he'd always ended the same way. There's evil in this world that don't scream or snarl. It just smiles and serves you coffee. My dad said that was the last story he ever told before the bottle finally caught up with him. And every time I drive through West Texas now, every time I see an old motel baking in the sun, I think about that yellow door and what was waiting behind it. Some nights, when the wind blows hard enough, I swear I can almost smell it. That same mix of iron and varnish drifting through the air. And I pray that somewhere out there, the ghosts sitting around that poker table have finally folded their last hand. Story 3. My husband had always been close to his childhood friend, a man I'll call John. They'd met in elementary school, became inseparable, and somehow stayed that way well into adulthood. When I met John, I thought he was one of those rare people who just made life easier. He had a soft voice, an easy laugh, and a kind of calm that made everyone around him feel at ease. There was nothing pretentious about him. He was polite, patient, and genuinely interested in people. I used to tell my husband how lucky he was to have a friend like that. Real friendship is hard to find, especially when you've cut ties with most of your family like we both had. John filled that empty space. He came to dinner, spent holidays with us, even helped us move apartments once. In a way, he was family. He was a nerd like us, into computers, tech forums, and old games that most people had long forgotten. We'd spend nights at the kitchen table, the three of us laughing over glitchy code or ancient computer parts. Sometimes we'd even compete to see who could fix a broken motherboard faster. John never raised his voice, never drank too much, never made anyone uncomfortable. The only odd thing about him was that he'd never dated. Not once. No girlfriend, no flings, nothing. For a while, my husband and I assumed maybe he was just shy. Or maybe he was gay, but too afraid to come out to his conservative family. We talked about it once or twice, but never to him. It felt like crossing a line. Then, out of nowhere, John moved away. Said his sister had bought a place out in the country and let him live there until she retired. It was about 3 hours from the city. At first, we thought it was good for him. His own space, some independence. But then he stopped calling. Weeks turned into months, months into years. He didn't answer texts, didn't show up online much, and when he did, it was always short replies. My husband missed him terribly, though he tried not to show it. I missed him too. though I'd never admit it out loud. After almost 2 years of silence, I decided enough was enough. I called him. To my surprise, he answered right away. Sounded cheerful even. We arranged to visit that weekend. When we got there, I remember being surprised by how isolated the area was. The house sat alone on a gravel road, surrounded by overgrown trees. There were no neighbors in sight, and the silence pressed in from all sides. John came out to greet us, smiling like nothing had changed, but I noticed something right away. He looked smaller somehow, thinner, pale. His clothes hung loose, and his eyes darted around like he was checking for something that wasn't there. The house itself was a mess. Dust everywhere, clutter piled in corners, old food containers on the counter. I tried to tell myself he was just adjusting, but the air inside felt thick, like the kind of smell that clings to a place when it hasn't been opened up in a long time. He told us his sister let him stay there rent-free until she retired. Said she came by every other weekend, though from the look of things she hadn't been around in a while. We went into his room, and it was like stepping back in time. Posters from the 90s, old game consoles, computer parts scattered across the floor, laundry everywhere. It was the room of a teenager, not a man in his late 30s. At dinner, I finally asked him why he'd fallen out of touch. He gave me a polite smile and said he'd just been busy. Between work, the move, and getting used to a new town, he'd lost track of time. He said it so casually that it almost worked, but something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like a line from a script. When my husband asked if he'd thought about getting his own place, John said it wasn't financially smart right now. When I asked if he was seeing anyone, he gave another smooth but empty answer. Said he wasn't in a position for that, not yet. He looked us in the eye when he said all these things, but there was no warmth behind it. Just calculation. Still, we let it go. We drove home telling ourselves he was just going through something. People change. Maybe he just needed space. But then, little by little, the weirdness started to add up. His social media, which had once been full of computer jokes and tech memes, became silent. Then randomly, I'd see a like pop up on some children's show page. Nickelodeon, Disney, things like that. And sometimes there'd be comments from him. Short ones. Things like, "Great episode," or "Can't wait to see what happens next." At first, I laughed about it. John had always been a little childish, a little nostalgic. But then the pattern continued. Shows that were meant for little kids, fan pages filled with young followers. Something about it sat wrong in my stomach. I told myself it wasn't my business. He wasn't hurting anyone, and maybe it was just comfort for him. Still, I didn't mention it to my husband. I didn't even know why. Years passed. John visited us once, just once, and again, it was only because I pushed for it. He acted normal enough, maybe a little distant, but that same tension was still there, like he was holding his breath the entire time. Then he drifted away again, vanished back into silence. My husband finally gave up. He said friendships sometimes fade, that we couldn't keep forcing it. He was hurt though. I could tell by the way he avoided John's name in conversation. Then, one evening, months later, John called me out of the blue. Said he'd moved back in with his mother because she was ill and needed care. I told him that was kind of him, that we were planning a trip to visit my father nearby and could stop in to see him too. That's when his tone changed. His voice went stiff. He said it wasn't a good time, that he was still settling in. That made no sense. He'd grown up in that house. What was there to settle into? I didn't press it. I told him we could wait until next month. He said sure, next month. But next month never came. Because before we could make that visit, something happened. Something that would make me wish I'd never called at all. It was a Saturday afternoon when everything changed. My husband was downstairs watching TV when I heard him call for me. His voice sharp, urgent. I thought maybe he was being dramatic again, like he sometimes was when he found a weird movie or funny clip he wanted to show me. But when I came down, he was white as chalk. He didn't even look at me, just pointed the remote at the screen. "Watch this," he said, barely above a whisper. It was a news broadcast, a local courtroom scene. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Just a man being escorted in, hands shackled, orange prison uniform. Then the camera zoomed in, and I froze. It was John. There was no mistaking it. That same quiet face, those same calm eyes that used to look up from a board game or a dinner table with a soft smile. Only now he looked hollow, like everything human had been scraped out from behind his expression. The newscaster said his full name clearly. No mistake there either. They said he had been arrested as part of one of the largest child trafficking investigations in recent history. My husband turned off the TV and just stared at the blank screen. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air in the room felt like it had thickened, too heavy to breathe. When I finally found my voice, all I could say was, "That can't be him." But it was. We replayed the segment over and over. Each time, I felt a little sicker. According to the report, the police had raided several properties across the state after shutting down a website on the dark web, a site that traded in child exploitation material. And John, our John, was one of the many names tied to it. They said it had taken years to piece together the network, that dozens of people were involved, that hundreds of files had been found. My husband looked like he might throw up. He kept shaking his head, mumbling, "No, not John. He couldn't, he wouldn't." But the evidence was clear. His face was there. His name was there. I remember sitting on the couch, feeling like the ground had vanished beneath me. My hands were cold. My heart was pounding. And in my head, I kept seeing flashes of all those little moments. John laughing at dinner, helping us build computers, watching old cartoons, smiling like everything was normal. But it wasn't. Later that night, my husband went online and started searching every news site he could find. The details only got worse. They said John's mother's house and his sister's place had both been searched. They found hard drives, hundreds of them, and each one filled with files. Things I didn't want to imagine. Things that made me sick just reading about. There was mention of a DNA match too. That was the moment my husband slammed the laptop shut. Neither of us wanted to know what that meant. For days, we barely spoke. The silence in the house felt like a wound. Every memory of John, the kind ones, the harmless ones, had turned rotten. We deleted his contact from our phones, scrubbed him from social media, and agreed never to reach out to his family. We didn't want answers anymore. We just wanted distance. My husband didn't handle it well. He stopped talking to people, stopped trusting anyone. He even changed our Wi-Fi name, our passwords, everything. He said he didn't want eyes on us. At night, he'd lie awake for hours. Sometimes I'd find him scrolling through old pictures of the three of us, just staring. "He was in our home," he said once, his voice trembling. "He ate with us. He fixed our computer. He sat right there at that table." I didn't have words, because I'd thought the same thing. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering, what had he been thinking during those moments? When he smiled, when he listened, when he told us jokes. Did he already have that other life? Was it always there, just hidden behind the surface? The worst part was realizing there had been signs, small ones, quiet ones, that we'd ignored because we didn't want to see them. The isolation, the secrecy, the way he lived like a child trapped in a man's body, the strange obsessive fondness for kids' shows. And yet we'd brushed it all away because he was John, sweet, dependable, harmless John. A few weeks after his arrest, the story faded from the news. The world moved on, but for us, it didn't end. Every now and then, my husband's phone would buzz with a news alert, another conviction, another sentence. And each time, I saw him flinch, like it was happening all over again. John got 30 years, no parole for at least 20. Even then, he'll wear an ankle monitor for the rest of his life. His sister removed his name from her property. His family deleted every trace of him online. It was like he never existed. But I can't forget him. Sometimes I still think about that day we visited him in that old house. The clutter, the closed windows, the smell of dust and electricity. How I'd felt something off but couldn't explain it. Maybe that house wasn't just cluttered. Maybe it was filled with secrets. I remember his computer setup. So many drives, cables, blinking lights. He'd brushed off my curiosity, saying he was just testing new software. I hadn't questioned it. I wish I had. I wish I'd said something, done something, anything. But the truth is, people like John don't show their monsters until it's far too late. Now, when I think of him, I don't picture the friend who fixed our computers or made us laugh. I see the man in the orange jumpsuit, head bowed, wrists chained, and I hear the echo of what my husband said the night after the news broke. "You never really know anyone," he whispered. "You just think you do." He was right, because even now, years later, I still sometimes wake up thinking about John, about how easy it was for him to pretend, about how normal he seemed. And every time I feel this cold realization crawl up my spine, how close that darkness really was, how it sat at our dinner table, how it smiled at us. I don't know what scares me more, that someone like John could exist, or that I never saw it coming. Story 4. Many years ago, I decided to take a road trip from Florida all the way to New Mexico. It wasn't for work or some grand adventure, just to visit my adopted aunt, Linda. I call her my adopted aunt because, well, I didn't have much family growing up, and she sort of filled that space without ever meaning to. She was decades older than me, kind, steady, and the kind of woman who made the world feel a little less lonely just by existing in it. We met when I was living in Clearwater. Back then, she was already having a rough time with her lungs, always talking about how the humidity made it worse. When her health started slipping, she packed up and moved to a drier part of New Mexico, somewhere near Albuquerque, with an old friend of hers. We had this tradition, her and I. We called it a fancy day. Once in a while, we'd dress up, go shopping, eat at a restaurant that charged too much for something small and delicious, and pretend we were high society for a few hours. It started as a way for her to cheer me up years ago after a bad breakup. But over time, it became our thing. So when I decided to visit her, I told myself I'd save every penny possible on the drive so I could splurge once I got there. That's how I found myself scrolling through cheap motels outside Shreveport, Louisiana, late one night. I'd driven nearly 13 hours by then, eyes aching from the highway lights, mind foggy with exhaustion. That's when I saw it, a listing for a little place called Hotel Deal, $20 a night. And the photos made it look charming. like one of those restored boutique places that tries to hold on to its 1950s personality. The reviews were thin, but not alarming. And honestly, I just needed a bed and a shower. I called ahead to ask if they accepted late check-ins, really late ones, and a sleepy voice on the other end said yes. Sounded like a man about my age, maybe a little younger. He assured me the front desk would be open all night. So I'd booked the room, told myself it was a lucky find, and drove on. By the time I got there, it was after midnight. The place sat just off the main highway, tucked between a dark tree line and a gas station that looked half abandoned. Still, the building itself seemed pleasant enough. Pale brick, warm light spilling from the lobby windows. There was even an old neon sign buzzing faintly above the door. Inside, it smelled like lemon cleaner and air conditioning. The clerk, same voice I'd spoken to on the phone, was slouched behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. He straightened up when I came in and handed me a brass key. Not a card, but a key. Old-fashioned, heavy. "Room 6, he said, sliding it toward me. I thanked him, but before heading off, I asked, "Busy night?" He shook his head. "Nope, you've got the place to yourself." That caught me off guard. "No one else checked in?" He just shrugged. "Not tonight." I should have thought more about that. How strange it was for a hotel, even a small one, to be completely empty on a weekend. But after hours of driving, all I could think about was a shower and sleep. The room was nicer than I expected. Neat, clean, and faintly floral from whatever air freshener they'd used. There was a single queen bed, a little desk, a television, and a bathroom that looked recently redone. I unpacked just enough to grab my toiletries and stepped into the bathroom. That's when I noticed something odd. The trash can under the sink didn't have a liner, just bare black plastic. I was about to head back to the front desk to ask for a bag, but then I remembered the small CVS bag I'd used to carry my travel-size shampoo and toothpaste. Figured I'd just use that instead. The trash can was the kind with a removable plastic insert. When I slid it out to put the bag in, I noticed something scratched into the bottom. Just one word, Trafico, carved roughly into the plastic. Now, I don't speak Spanish, but even in my tired state, I knew that word. I'd heard it before, but the meaning didn't really click in my mind at the time. I just thought, weird place for graffiti. Probably some cleaner or guest trying to be funny. I shrugged it off, lined the trash can, threw away my toothbrush wrapper, and went to take my shower. The water was hot, and the pressure was good. Better than I expected, honestly. For a few minutes, I let the stress of the road wash off me. When I came out, wrapped in a towel, the air felt heavier somehow. Quieter, like the walls were holding their breath. I told myself I was imagining it. I dried off, then started hunting for the hairdryer. Usually those are tucked away in a drawer or under the bedside table. Sure enough, I found one in a small cabinet by the bed. When I lifted it out, something white fluttered underneath. A piece of paper, folded in half. My first thought was that it was some kind of maintenance note. Maybe something saying the dryer didn't work. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. In shaky, uneven handwriting were 2 words. "Help me." That's all. I turned it over, but there was nothing on the back. No name, no date, nothing. Just those words staring up at me. For a few seconds, I stood frozen, paper trembling between my fingers. The room felt colder. The hum of the air conditioner suddenly sounded too loud. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing in the corner watching, but it was just me. The same neat bed, the same floral curtains swaying slightly from the vent. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that note. My mind spun through possibilities. Someone playing a prank, a leftover from a previous guest, or something worse. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. My heart wouldn't slow down. So finally, I decided to take it to the front desk. When I got there, the clerk was still sitting behind the counter, same magazine in hand, eyes half-lidded like he'd been about to fall asleep. I explained everything, how I'd found the note, how it made me uncomfortable, how maybe someone had been in trouble in that room before me. He barely reacted. After I finished, he asked, "Was there any sign of damage? Blood? Anything like that?" "No," I said. "Just the note." He shrugged. "Then it's probably just some kind of joke. Kids, maybe. Happens sometimes." The way he said it, flat, unconcerned, made my skin crawl. "So you're not going to check the room?" I asked. "Not unless you want to move or check out," he said. That was it. No curiosity, no concern. Just that bored look, like I was wasting his time. I went back to my room, heart pounding harder now than before. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, staring at the walls, and then something in me snapped. I packed my bag, grabbed my keys, and walked out. I didn't even bother checking out properly. I just left the key on the counter as I passed through the lobby and stepped into the night air, breathing hard. I hurried across the parking lot, the sound of my shoes echoing against the pavement. The night air was warm, but my skin prickled with cold sweat. My car was the only one parked there. No other guests, no signs of movement, just rows of empty spaces under buzzing fluorescent lights. As soon as I got inside, I locked the doors, turned the key, and pulled out of that lot without looking back. My headlights cut through the trees, lining the narrow road, but for a long while, I felt like something was still behind me, something just out of sight. I didn't stop until I was several miles away, just a stretch of dark highway surrounded by woods. I pulled over, parked on the shoulder, and finally let myself breathe. Funny thing was, sitting there in the middle of nowhere, I felt safer than I had in that hotel room. Maybe it was just instinct. Maybe it was the silence. Whatever it was, I knew I wasn't going back. I reclined the seat, tried to close my eyes, and told myself I'd rest for a couple of hours before heading west again. But even with the doors locked and the engine off, sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that note. Help me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a prank. Maybe a weird joke from a bored housekeeper. But then I kept thinking about that word scratched into the trash can. Traffico. It echoed in my head like a whisper. I'd brushed it off before, but now, in the quiet of the highway, it started to make sense. Traffico. Trafficking. I sat up, heart pounding, and suddenly I couldn't stop thinking about the desk clerk's blank expression, the way he'd looked past me like he'd heard it all before. Eventually, exhaustion got the better of me. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, the sky was gray and the birds were starting to stir. I turned on the car, pulled back onto the road, and didn't stop until I hit Texas. By the time I reached Albuquerque the next evening, I was running on fumes and caffeine. My Aunt Linda took one look at me and said, "You look like you saw a ghost." I laughed weakly and told her what happened. The note, the trash can, the clerk, how I'd left in the middle of the night. She didn't interrupt, just listened, her face tightening as I spoke. When I finished, she said 5 words that somehow made everything feel a little less terrible. "You did the right thing." That's what she said, over and over again. I tried to believe her, But I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that maybe someone hadn't made it out. Maybe the note had been real. Maybe that word in the trash can wasn't some joke at all. A few days later, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to call the hotel. A woman answered this time, cheerful and polite. I told her my name, the night I'd stayed there, and that I'd found something in the room she should probably know about. I mentioned the word traffico scratched into the trash can, and how I thought it might mean something. She paused, then said, "Hold on just a moment, ma'am. Let me check the room." I waited, gripping the phone tight, listening to the faint hum on the other end. When she came back, her tone was calm, too calm. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said. "There's nothing written on the trash can. Are you sure it was in this room?" "Yes," I said, my stomach dropping. "Room 6. It was carved right into the plastic liner inside the small bathroom trash can. You can't miss it." She hesitated again, then said, "Well, I have that exact trash can sitting on the desk in front of me right now. It still has your toothbrush wrapper in it, actually. But I'm looking right at it, and there's nothing scratched into it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then it hit me. Either she was lying, or someone had replaced it. "Maybe you should double check," I said quietly. She didn't respond right away. Then, in a clipped tone, she said, "I'm certain, ma'am. There's nothing here." That was when I knew the trash can had been swapped out. Someone had gone into that room after I left, maybe right after, and replaced the evidence. I thanked her for her time, hung up, and sat there with my phone in my hand for a long time. There was no proof, no way to prove anything. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. After that, I tried to shake it off. Tried to convince myself it wasn't my problem anymore. I was safe. I'd left. That should have been the end of it. But no matter how far I drove, that feeling followed me. The sense that I'd brushed up against something rotten and real. Sometimes at night, when I'm lying in bed, I still think about that hotel. The way it was completely empty. The way the clerk didn't blink when I told him about the note. It's been years now, and I've told this story a dozen times, but every time I do, I still get that same cold feeling in my chest. Because the truth is, I don't know what I stumbled into. I don't know if someone really needed help that night, or if I was just the unlucky one to find a leftover trace of something long over. But I can't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, I showed up a little too late. And somewhere, behind one of those locked doors in the hotel deal, someone once sat where I did, praying that somebody would find that note before it was too late. Linda was right. I did the right thing by leaving. Even if it was a prank, even if it meant sleeping in my car on the side of the road, I did the right thing. Because sometimes when something in your gut tells you to go, you listen. And sometimes that instinct is the only thing standing between you and something you'll never come back from. Story 5. My name is Desh. I was born in Sri Lanka, but I've been living and working in Mumbai for the last 20 years. My daughter found this horror channel last Halloween, and she's been obsessed with it ever since. I wasn't sure if she should be watching such scary stories at her age, but truth be told, her English has improved so much since then that I decided to let her keep watching. She's 14 now, smart, stubborn, and kind in her own way. We've always had a good relationship, but like most fathers and daughters, we've had our moments. When she was 12, she developed this habit of slamming her bedroom door whenever she got upset. Sometimes it was because of school, sometimes because of friends, sometimes for no reason at all. The sound, it used to send a jolt straight through me. I'd get furious, I'd shout, and she never understood why. She once told me, "Appa, you didn't get this mad when Akash broke the window with his cricket ball." And she was right. I didn't. But she didn't know the real reason. I told her it was the sound that bothered me, the echo of the door slamming. But that wasn't the whole truth. The real reason lies in something that happened long before she was born. Something I've never been able to tell her. It happened when I was 24, just a few years before I met her mother. I was working as a floor supervisor at the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel in Mumbai. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, working there. The pay was good, the reputation even better. My parents were so proud. They used to tell everyone back home in Sri Lanka that their son worked at one of the most prestigious hotels in India. I took the job seriously. Long hours, demanding bosses, but it didn't matter. I loved it. I could see my future there. I even started thinking about saving for a home, maybe even a family. But everything changed one night. It was November 26th, 2008. I'll never forget that date as long as I live. The hotel was busy, the lobby filled with guests and chatter, the smell of expensive perfume and freshly baked pastries from the cafe blending into the air. I remember feeling proud of how smooth the evening was going. Then, around 9:30 p.m., we heard what sounded like firecrackers. Someone even joked that a wedding party must have started early, but within seconds the sound became sharper, louder, metallic bursts that echoed off the marble walls. Gunfire. I was in the main lobby when people started screaming and running. I can still hear the sound of heels clattering against the floor, glass shattering, the faint scent of gunpowder creeping through the air. I dropped to the ground behind the reception desk as bullets tore through the front windows, the air filled with chaos. Some people froze, others ran. But the worst were the ones who didn't make a sound at all, just collapsed quietly, like puppets with their strings cut. I remember peeking out from behind the counter and seeing them. Two men dressed in black carrying rifles. Their faces were calm, almost bored, as if this wasn't the first time they'd done it. They fired at everything that moved. Guests, staff, even the chandeliers above. One of them laughed when the crystal shattered and rained down like glittering snow. That laugh still haunts me. I crawled back, shaking, and grabbed my phone. I whispered to the emergency dispatcher where we were, the Taj Mahal Hotel. "There are gunmen. Please send help." My voice trembled so badly I could barely get the words out. Then I realized something. The hotel had hundreds of guests, many of them tourists. They had no idea what was happening. I couldn't just stay there. So I forced myself up and slipped through a staff corridor, signaling to a small group of guests to follow me. We moved quietly, using the service hallways to stay hidden. I told them not to make a sound. One American woman was crying softly, and I remember squeezing her hand to calm her down. I told her we'd get out, but I didn't believe it. Through the walls, I could hear the gunfire spreading upward, moving floor by floor. They weren't just attacking at random. They were searching, calling out in Urdu, asking for foreigners, British, American, anyone they thought would make a bigger statement. The air grew thick with smoke. I could smell something burning. Later, I learned they had started setting fires in restaurants and guest rooms, dousing furniture and gasoline and lighting it. I remember the smell so clearly, sweet, chemical, and wrong. We hid it in a small staff storage room, maybe 10 of us. The lights flickered above us. Someone whispered prayers under their breath. Someone else sobbed into their hands. Every gunshot made us flinch. At one point, I heard footsteps right outside the door, heavy boots, A shadow moved past the crack under the frame. I held my breath, certain that if I made a sound, that door would open and we'd all die. But the steps moved on. Hours passed, though it felt like days. My phone battery was nearly dead, but I dared not turn it off. We could hear explosions, grenades, I would learn later. The whole building shook with each blast. One of my colleagues, Rajiv, whispered that we should try to make a run for it, find a back exit. But I said no. If we went out there, we'd die. We had to wait for help. And then somewhere above us, we heard the hotel's public address system crackle to life. A voice came through. Male, calm, controlled. All Hindus may leave, it said. Tell us where the Western guests are, and you will be spared. The room went dead silent. A woman near me, an older tourist, turned and grabbed my arm. Please, she whispered, don't tell them where we are. I shook my head. I won't, I said. Even if I wanted to, I knew it was a trap. If I stepped out of that room, I'd never walk back in. We stayed hidden for hours more, the smoke getting thicker, the air harder to breathe. Someone fainted. Someone else began to pray louder, and I had to cover their mouth gently, begging them to be quiet. At some point, the gunfire came closer again. I could hear shouting, screams, the thud of boots on the floor above. And I remember thinking, that night might be my last. We stayed hidden in that small storage room for what felt like forever. My throat was dry and my legs were cramping, but I didn't dare move. Every second stretched into an hour. The air was hot and thick, filled with the smell of smoke and sweat. I kept listening, trying to separate the sounds, gunfire, explosions, screams, from my own heartbeat. Somewhere down the hall, I heard glass shatter again, followed by a man shouting in pain. Another burst of gunfire, then silence. Silence can be worse than noise in those moments. It's when you start to imagine things. Every shadow, every flicker of light feels like someone about to burst through the door. A few of the guests started whispering prayers. One man was shaking uncontrollably. I remember putting a hand on his shoulder, whispering, just a little longer, stay quiet, help will come. But I didn't believe my own words. At that point, I had no idea if anyone outside even knew what was happening inside the hotel. The fire alarms started going off not long after. The sound was deafening. Red lights flashed in the hallway through the crack under the door, and we could see smoke starting to seep in. The air grew thicker by the minute. I told everyone to cover their mouths with cloth, napkins, sleeves, anything. Then we heard a loud explosion from above us, like a thunderclap that shook the walls. The lights went out completely. We were in darkness, breathing smoke, waiting to die. A woman began sobbing loudly, and I crawled over to her. Please, I whispered. Please, you have to stay quiet. She was trembling, saying she wanted to go home, saying she couldn't breathe. I held her hand and said, you will go home. You will. Just don't make a sound. That moment, it broke me. I could hear how scared she was. I could feel her hand shaking. I wanted to protect her, all of them, but I was just as terrified. Minutes later, though it could have been an hour, we heard shouting again, but this time it was different. Louder, sharper, commands in Hindi and English. Police. The security forces had arrived. The terrorists started shooting again, moving rapidly through the corridors. The battle had begun. The whole building echoed with gunfire. Grenades went off. The walls shook with every explosion. One of the guests screamed, and I had to press my palm over his mouth before the sound could escape. And then, through all of that noise, I heard a sound, I'll never forget. A door down the hallway creaking open. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Someone was coming. The steps got closer, one after another, crunching over broken glass. Whoever it was stopped right outside our door. You could have heard a pin drop inside that room. I was sure they could hear us breathing. The doorknob turned. I froze. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I'd pass out. The knob rattled once, then stopped. Whoever it was, they just stood there for a moment. And then, just as suddenly, the steps began again, this time moving away. I didn't breathe until the sound disappeared completely. We stayed there, unmoving, for another hour until finally we heard a new voice. "Mumbai police! If anyone is in there, come out slowly." I didn't move at first. I was terrified it was a trick. But then I heard the clatter of radios, the sound of boots, and the unmistakable tone of trained men giving orders. I opened the door slowly, waving a white napkin in the air. When I stepped out, the corridor was filled with smoke and debris. The marble walls were scorched black. There were holes in the ceiling, and on the floor, I saw blood. I won't describe it, but it's an image I'll never forget. The officers let us out one by one. I remember holding the American woman's arm, helping her walk, because her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. As we made our way through the hallway, I saw familiar faces, colleagues, guests, people I'd smiled at just hours earlier, lying still. Some of them were people I'd worked with for years, people I'd laughed with at lunch, shared stories with. Now they were gone. When we finally made it outside, the air was cold. The night was lit up by flashing lights, ambulances, police, fire trucks. The sound of sirens filled the streets. Reporters were shouting questions. People were crying, embracing each other. But I just stood there, numb. I looked back at the hotel, the place I'd been so proud to work in. The grand facade was glowing orange from the fires inside, smoke curling into the night sky. It didn't feel real. It looked like a scene from a nightmare. Over the next few hours, they took our names, checked us for injuries, and sent us home. But I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back there, hearing the gunfire, smelling the smoke, feeling that doorknob turn. For weeks, I avoided loud places. Every sudden sound, a car backfiring, a door slamming, made my heart race. I couldn't go back to work. The hotel eventually reopened, beautifully restored, a symbol of resilience. But I never set foot inside again. The nightmares came for years. Even now, 17 years later, sometimes they still do. That's why, when my daughter slams her door, it isn't anger that flashes through me, it's fear. That sudden, sharp bang takes me right back to the lobby, to the gunfire echoing through marble halls. For a split second, I'm there again, 24 years old, watching the world collapse around me. I know she doesn't understand. She thinks I overreact, and I can't blame her. How could she know? I never told her what happened. I didn't want her to see me as someone broken. But maybe, if she ever hears this, she'll finally understand that I'm not angry when she slams the door. I'm terrified, not of her, but of the sound that once meant death. Story 6. I've made a lot of dumb decisions in my life, but this one still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. It happened a few years back in Tempe, Arizona, not far from Mill Avenue, the strip packed with bars and neon and noise. It was one of those sticky desert nights where the air smells like heat and spilled beer. My friends and I were doing what we always did on weekends, bar hopping. laughing too loud, pretending life wasn't waiting for us the next morning. By midnight, I was gone. That kind of drunk where you start thinking the world is just one big maze you can wander through. I had this terrible habit of wandering off when I drank, like some part of me wanted to get lost. And that night, I did. At first, I didn't care. I stumbled down one street, then another, confident I could just feel my way back. I must have walked for nearly an hour before I realized I didn't recognize anything around me. No bars, no lights, just quiet, empty roads. My phone was dead, my head spinning, and I had that blurry kind of panic that doesn't hit all at once. It just starts to hum beneath your skin. I decided I'd just walk north, because that's where my friend's house was. At least, I thought it was north. The truth is, I couldn't navigate my way out of a grocery store parking lot when sober, and I was miles off course. The streets were almost deserted, just a few parked cars, the occasional hum of an engine in the distance. The sky was this deep, purplish black, and the heat clung to me like static. I remember thinking it was peaceful, almost nice. And then the headlights hit me. A sedan swerved off the road and stopped hard in front of me. Tires screeched. The sound cracked through the quiet like a whip. I froze mid-step, blinking into the glare. The driver's door opened, and a large man stepped out. Black, broad-shouldered, maybe in his 30s. The way he looked at me, it wasn't a casual glance. It was locked, like he was trying to decide something about me. Now most people would have backed away, maybe run, but I was too drunk and too dumb to understand the situation. So instead, I just smiled and said, "Hey, man, what's good?" and gave him a little wave. He stopped mid-stride. His expression shifted, confused, like he wasn't sure what to make of me. For a second, he just stared, then said something I couldn't make out. I squinted, trying to focus. "Huh?" He raised his voice. "Where you going?" I told him I was trying to get to my buddy's place, but was completely lost. He watched me for a long moment. Then he said, "Get in." I didn't even hesitate. I just walked around to the passenger side and got in. The smell inside the car was sharp. Gun oil, sweat, and something metallic. He wore a tank top, his arm wrapped in white bandages that looked fresh. Tattoos ran down both arms, inked names and faces and symbols I didn't recognize. Then I noticed the gun, a black pistol tucked into his waistband, the grip glinting in the dashboard light. Even seeing it, I didn't panic. My brain just filed it away like it was background detail. That's how drunk I was. He asked where I was going, and I gave him the wrong directions with full confidence. He started driving anyway, slow and deliberate, one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually near the gun. I remember talking a lot. I always do when I drink. At first, he barely responded. But then, as we drove through those empty Tempe streets, he started opening up. He told me he'd just gotten out of the hospital after being shot. Pulled his bandaged arm up to show me. Said his girlfriend had dumped him because of it. Said she was tired of his lifestyle. He used the word lifestyle like it was a job description. Then he said something that cut through my haze. "I was riding around looking for somebody to rob when I saw you." I laughed. I actually laughed. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He glanced at me, his eyes tired and heavy. "I did time for robbery before," he said quietly. "Was gonna do it again tonight." I could feel my throat go dry. My wallet was in my pocket, about $200 in cash. Not much, but enough for someone desperate. I thought about handing it over just to be safe, but instead, I said the dumbest thing possible. Man, that's rough. And somehow, that broke the tension. He chuckled a little, shook his head. You crazy, he said. You really don't get scared easy, huh? I shrugged. Guess not. He started talking again, softer this time. Told me he wanted to be a rapper, that he had songs written, beats saved on his phone, that he was trying to get clean and make something of himself. His voice cracked when he said it. I told him he should go for it, that he had a story worth telling. He didn't respond right away, but I saw his shoulders drop a little, like the fight went out of him. 15 minutes later, we pulled up outside my friend's house. I recognized it immediately. The porch light, the cracked driveway, the noise of music leaking from the windows. I could have just gotten out, said thanks, and gone inside. But some part of me, that weird drunk politeness, made me ask, "You want to come in for a bit?" He looked at me for a long time, like he was trying to figure out if I was serious. Then he nodded once. Yeah, all right. When I opened the front door, my friends were all there, half drunk, half relieved, and then instantly confused when they saw me walk in with a stranger. He followed me inside, quiet, his bandaged arm hanging at his side, gun still tucked into his waistband. And that was when the room changed. The air in the room went heavy the second we stepped in. My friends froze mid-conversation. The music kept playing, but it suddenly sounded too loud, too sharp. Everyone's eyes flicked from me to the stranger beside me. This tattooed guy with a bandaged arm and a gun half hidden in his waistband. I mumbled something like, "This is, my new buddy. He gave me a ride." The guy just nodded once, expression unreadable. My best friend, Connor, gave me a look. One that said, "What the hell did you do?" But he didn't say anything. That's the kind of friend he is. We walked down the hallway toward Connor's room. It was dimly lit, smoke hanging in the air, music low and steady. There was a big metal safe in the corner, the kind you can't help but notice, heavy, gray, expensive looking. My new friend spotted it instantly. He walked right up to it, staring for a moment. Then, without saying a word, he reached into his waistband and pulled out the pistol. Every muscle in my body went rigid. My friends froze too. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the speaker. He set the gun down gently on top of the safe. Nobody breathed. For a split second, I thought this was it. I thought he was about to rob us, or worse. But he didn't touch the weapon again. He just turned toward us and said, "This your place?" Connor nodded carefully. "Nice spot," the guy said. His voice was calm, almost normal. Then he sat down, like nothing was wrong. The tension in the air loosened, just barely. Connor glanced at me, silently screaming, "What are you doing?" But I didn't have an answer. I just shrugged like an idiot. A few minutes later, someone passed him a joint. He hesitated, then took it. We all sat there in a strange circle, smoking, talking. Small talk at first, then music. He told us about his beats, about wanting to put out a mixtape. Connor pulled up a few tracks he'd been working on, and the two of them actually started talking shop. About rhythm, flow, recording setups. It was surreal. A man who, 20 minutes ago, had planned to rob someone was now nodding his head to our music, laughing softly, saying, "This is fire, bro." After maybe half an hour, he stood up. "Hey," he said, "I'm gonna roll." He walked back to the safe, picked up the gun, tucked it into his waistband. For a second, he looked around at all of us, a room full of broke, stoned college kids who had no idea how close we'd just been to something terrible. Then he looked at me. "You a lucky dude," he said quietly. "Real lucky." And then he left. The sound of the door closing was like air rushing back into a vacuum. We all exhaled at once. Connor turned to me, eyes wide. Who the hell was that? I just sat there, heart still pounding, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept hearing his voice in my head. I was looking for someone to rob when I saw you. He could have done it. He could have pulled that trigger, taken the cash, the car, everything. But for whatever reason, maybe my stupid drunk friendliness, maybe his need to be seen as something more than a thug, he didn't. Sometimes I think about how thin that line is between a normal night and the kind that changes your life forever. He was a criminal, yeah. A gang member. A man who carried a gun like it was part of his skin. But he was also human. Tired. Heartbroken. Bleeding from a wound he hadn't even let heal. I think maybe that night, he didn't need another victim. He just needed someone to treat him like he wasn't the villain in his own story. I'll never know what happened to him after that, but every time I pass through Tempe at night and see those same quiet streets, I think about the headlights, the gun, and how close I came to being a statistic. And how somehow, kindness and luck got me home instead. Story 7. I grew up hearing about a town called Buckhorn. It wasn't far from where I lived, a few hours north, tucked between endless fields and the dark fringe of a forest no one ever seemed to name. The kind of place you pass through without meaning to. One gas station, a post office, and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. I only went there once. And if I could erase that weekend from my memory, I would. It started with a call from my cousin Ryan. He'd just gotten a new job in construction, said they were doing some road work near Buckhorn and that he could use an extra hand. I was between jobs, didn't have much going on, so I agreed. He said the town was quiet but decent, his words. We drove up together on a Friday afternoon. The highway narrowed the closer we got. 4 lanes down to 2, then to 1. The trees started leaning inward like they were closing ranks. By the time we passed the old wooden sign that said, "Welcome to Buckhorn, population 712, the radio had started to crackle and fade. Ryan didn't notice. He was humming along to some song that wasn't even playing anymore. The town looked wrong. Not abandoned, just stuck. Every house was painted the same, washed-out yellow. The curtains in every window were closed. Even the air felt heavier, like humidity, but colder. We stopped at the diner first. Martha's, hand-painted letters on a faded red awning. The bell above the door rang when we stepped inside, and every head turned toward us, not in surprise, just in sync. 6 or 7 locals, all looking at us with the same flat expression. Martha herself was behind the counter. She looked maybe 60, gray hair in a perfect bun. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You boys new to town?" Ryan laughed. "Just here for a job." "Construction?" she asked. He nodded. "You'll be working near the ridge," she said quietly. Like it wasn't really a question. "Be careful up there." The way she said it made the room go still for a second. Nobody else spoke until she turned her back. We ordered coffee and pie. Neither tasted like anything, just texture. That night, we stayed in a cheap rental house on the edge of town. It had been listed online, one of those too-good-to-be-true weekend deals. I remember walking through the door and feeling my chest tighten, like the air inside hadn't moved in years. The lights flickered when we turned them on. Ryan brushed it off. "Old wiring," he said. We unpacked, made dinner, and by 10 p.m., I was already half asleep on the couch. I woke up an hour later to the sound of something scratching against the window. At first, I thought it was a branch, but when I sat up, I realized the window was open. just a crack, though I knew I'd closed it. The scratching stopped the moment I looked at it. Ryan was standing in the hallway. His face was half lit by the bathroom light. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He just looked at me, then tilted his head slightly, like he was listening to something else entirely. After a few seconds, he said, "It's just the wind," and went back to his room. Except the trees outside weren't moving. The next morning, we drove to the job site, a stretch of road leading out of town, right where the forest began. There were already a few guys there, most of them locals. None of them talked much. One of them, an older man with a limp, kept staring into the trees like he was waiting for something. At lunch, Ryan wandered off toward the woods, said he wanted to check something out. I waited for him by the truck. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I finally went after him, calling his name. He came out of the trees eventually, his shirt covered in dirt, his eyes distant. When I asked what happened, he just said, "There's something back there." "What?" I asked. He shook his head. "You'll see tonight." We didn't talk the rest of the day. That evening, when we got back to the house, I found him sitting at the table with a map spread out in front of him. He'd drawn a circle around a part of the forest labeled Old Quarry. He looked up at me and said, "We're going there after dark." I told him he was out of his mind. He said something strange then, something that didn't sound like him at all. "They only come out when the lights are gone." He smiled, but it wasn't his smile. And that was the first time I realized that whatever Buckhorn was, whatever it did, it was already working on him. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air in the house felt thicker, like something unseen was breathing with us. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and stopped mid-sound, like the noise had been swallowed by the dark. At 11:47 p.m., Ryan knocked on my door. He didn't wait for me to answer. He just opened it and said, "It's time." He had a flashlight in one hand and the map in the other. His pupils looked huge, almost swallowing the color of his eyes. I told him I wasn't going anywhere, that whatever he thought he saw wasn't real. He didn't argue. He just said, very calmly, "You can stay here, but if you hear them, don't open the door." And then he left. For a while, I sat there in silence, listening to his boots crunch across the gravel outside. The sound faded toward the forest line. Then nothing. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. I must have drifted off because when I opened my eyes again, the flashlight beam was coming through the window, moving in slow, irregular arcs. Then it stopped, aimed directly at the house. I went to the window. The light clicked off. The darkness that followed was absolute. When my phone buzzed on the nightstand, I jumped. It was a text from Ryan. "Come see. You have to see this." The message had no timestamp. The phone said, "No service." I shouldn't have gone. I know that now. But something in me felt pulled, like my thoughts weren't entirely my own. I grabbed my jacket, took the spare flashlight, and stepped outside. The night was so quiet it felt wrong. Even the insects had gone still. I followed the dirt road until I reached the tree line, where the ground turned soft and uneven. The forest smelled like iron and rain. I called Ryan's name, but the sound seemed to fall flat, as if the air was swallowing it whole. About 20 minutes in, I saw the light again. A faint white glow, low to the ground. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't his flashlight. It was something else, pulsing beneath the soil like a heat lightning under glass. The trees around it leaned inward, their branches twisting together like hands. I heard whispering, not words, just a shape of sound. It came from everywhere at once. Then I saw him. Ryan was standing by the edge of a shallow pit. His back was to me, shoulders rising and falling like he was trying to catch his breath. The earth at his feet looked freshly turned. There was something half buried in it. I couldn't tell what. "Ryan," I said quietly, "we should go." He didn't move. After a long moment, he said, "They're not gone. They've been waiting." I took a step closer. The glow brightened, pulsing through the soil between us. I could see now that it wasn't light exactly, more like movement, shapes shifting just under the dirt. He looked over his shoulder then, and for a split second, I saw someone else's expression on his face. Blank, expectant, almost reverent. "They said it's our turn," he whispered. That's when the ground moved. Not like an earthquake, not a vibration, but as if something large was pushing upward from underneath. The trees bent toward the pit. The whispering grew louder, and Ryan dropped to his knees. I ran. I didn't look back until I broke out of the tree line. The house was still there, lights flickering through the windows. My chest felt like it was on fire. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. The next thing I remember is waking up on the floor, to sunlight leaking through the blinds. My clothes were damp with mud. The house was silent. Ryan's bed was empty. His things were still there. Wallet, phone, boots by the door, but no sign of him. I tried calling for help, but the phones were dead, both cell and landline. Even the clock on the wall had stopped at 3:12. I drove straight out of town. No one stopped me. No cars, no people. Just the same yellow houses watching me pass. When I reached the highway, the radio started working again, mid-song, like nothing had happened. I reported him missing, of course. The police went out there, searched the woods, the quarry, everything. They found the pit, but nothing else. No sign of a struggle. No footprints but mine. They said he probably ran off. Stress, exhaustion. That maybe I was mistaken about what I saw in the dark. A month later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was the map Ryan had drawn, the one with the circle around the quarry. Only now there was another circle, smaller, drawn around a road about 5 miles from where we'd stayed. And written beside it, in handwriting that wasn't his, were 3 words. "You came back." I moved across the country after that, changed my number, stopped using my real name online. But sometimes when I'm driving at night, I'll catch a flicker of something in the trees off the highway. A light too steady to be fireflies, too cold to be headlights. And for a second, I swear I can hear Ryan's voice somewhere far behind me saying, "They only come out when the lights are gone." Story 8. In my years as a paranormal investigator in Tokyo, I've seen almost everything that could unsettle a rational mind. Cold spots that turned out to be air vents, flickering lights caused by bad wiring, footsteps explained by old wood contracting in the night. Experience taught me early on. Most hauntings are misunderstandings wearing masks of fear. That's why when the package arrived, I didn't think much of it. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, tied clumsily with thin string. No name on the return address, just a partial postal code and a smear of ink that might have once said Shinjuku. It weighed almost nothing. I remember holding it in my palm and thinking it felt empty, like a prop from a bad magic trick. Inside was a single USB drive, wrapped carefully in red paper covered in handwritten Buddhist sutras. The ink had bled slightly, as if the words had been written with trembling hands. Beneath it lay a note. "Please help my daughter. Watch until the end." That's all it said. No name, no explanation. I set it aside. Over the years, I'd learned the hard way that the most desperate pleas often came from people who needed doctors, not investigators. Parents convinced their children were cursed when they were simply sick. Grieving widows mistaking loneliness for haunting. The human mind can summon horrors far more vividly than any ghost. Still, I kept glancing at that red paper on my desk. The color seemed too vivid, like it didn't belong under the pale glow of my office lights. For 3 days, the USB stayed untouched. I went about my usual work, reviewing case files, returning calls, cataloging evidence. But my eyes always drifted back to that small flash drive wrapped like an offering. On the 4th morning, something changed. When I entered my office, the air felt wrong, colder than it should have been for April in Tokyo. My breath misted in the air, faint but visible, and the USB drive was sitting in the middle of my desk. I was certain I'd left it locked in my top drawer. That was also the first night the dreams began. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a tunnel. Long, wet stone walls, the kind you find in old drainage systems. A little girl stood at the far end, her back to me. She wore a white hospital gown, stained around the edges. On her neck, climbing toward her jaw, were markings, black, intricate, like calligraphy drawn by an unsteady hand. They moved slightly, almost breathing. She would always start to turn, and painfully slow, and before I could see her face, I'd wake up drenched in sweat. After a week of those dreams, I stopped trying to ignore the USB. It was a Friday night. The city was quiet outside, rain drizzling against the window. I turned off the overhead light, plugged the drive into my laptop, and waited. It held 12 video files, not neatly numbered either, just 1, then 4, then 7, and so on. The gaps between them made me uneasy before I'd even hit play. The first video opened on a woman sitting in front of a camera, mid-30s maybe, with the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept properly in months. Her hair was messy, her skin pale, her eyes raw from crying. "My name is Yumo," she said. "If you're watching this, you're already part of it. I'm sorry." Her voice was barely above a whisper. She talked about her daughter, Sakura, 6 years old, hospitalized for weeks, no diagnosis, her condition worsening by the day. The doctors couldn't explain the strange markings that had begun to spread across her skin, dark spirals that looked drawn in ink. At first, I thought it was poor lighting or shadows cast by medical tubing. But when the woman moved the camera closer, I saw the lines pulsing faintly beneath the child's skin, alive, deliberate, forming patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. The next video cut abruptly to documentary footage, handheld, shaky, time-stamped 3 years earlier. Yumo explained that she'd once been part of a film crew exploring remote villages in Yunnan province. They'd been shooting a piece about traditional Buddhist practices and local folk religion. The early clips looked routine. Mist over the mountains, villagers preparing offerings, elders being interviewed about harvest rituals. But even then, something felt off. Every villager they spoke to avoided eye contact. When they thought the camera wasn't on them, they'd glance toward the mountains, muttering quietly. And their faces carried a kind of pity, the way people look at someone already doomed. As the days passed, the crew pushed deeper into the region. Roads turned to dirt tracks, and then to paths barely wide enough for one person. The video quality began to degrade, digital static creeping around the edges of the frame like mold. In one segment, they interviewed an elderly woman. She spoke softly for nearly 20 minutes about marriage traditions, the way young couples were blessed by village monks. But when they played the recording back, Her words were different. The translation Yumo added to the video was incomplete, most of it indecipherable, but a few phrases were clear. Mother Buddha must never be seen. The face that knows all faces. Once unveiled, it must feed. After that file, I had to stop watching. My office felt colder than before. The shadows under my desk stretched too far, bending wrong. I turned on every light I had and sat there until morning, but I went back to the footage the next night. I couldn't help myself. The next segment jumped ahead several weeks. Yumo's narration explained that the crew had heard of a secret ritual performed once every 60 years. A ceremony said to ensure good harvests and ward off famine. Their local guide begged them not to go. The recording captured him in tears, pleading, "Those who watch cannot forget." Still, they went. That's where the footage started to unravel completely. Heavy digital noise, dropped frames, colors bleeding into one another. But what I could make out was enough to keep me awake for days. Through a crack in an ancient temple wall, the camera captured a child, maybe 8 years old, standing at the center of a circle of chanting villagers. His body was covered in moving patterns identical to Sakura's, flowing across his skin like liquid ink. The air seemed to vibrate with sound, a low harmonic resonance that made the microphone distort. Even with my volume turned down, I could feel it in my chest, like standing too close to a passing train. And through the static, a shape appeared behind the boy, massive, cloaked, its face hidden behind a yellowed veil scrawled with text. The camera lingered for less than a second, but in that heartbeat, I felt something looking back. Then the file ended. By then, my hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my laptop. I shut it down and sat in silence, watching the city lights blur beyond the rain-streaked window. But the quiet didn't last long. That night, the dream returned. Only this time, the girl in the tunnel turned fully toward me, and I saw the patterns moving under her skin like a reflection on water. She opened her mouth, but the sound that came out wasn't hers. It was the same harmonic vibration from the recording, low, impossible, resonating through my bones. When I woke, my nose was bleeding, and on my desk, the red paper that had once wrapped the USB was gone. The next morning, I found something written on my office wall. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. Faint lines that looked like water damage, curving slightly across the plaster. But when I stepped closer, I saw that they weren't cracks. They were symbols. Thin, deliberate strokes, not random, but ordered. Writing, and I recognized them. They were identical to the patterns that had appeared on Sakura's skin in the video. I scrubbed at them until my hands ached. They smeared faintly, but never disappeared, like stains beneath the surface. When I finally gave up and sat back, the faint smell of iron hung in the air. I told myself I was imagining it. Lack of sleep, too many late nights spent chasing phantoms that didn't exist. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. That evening, I opened the USB again. The next file, 7.mp4, began with Yumo sitting in the dark, the glow of her monitor reflecting in her eyes. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the camera. Behind her, something faintly pulsed in the shadows. She spoke quickly this time, almost breathless. "The others are gone," she said. Takashi. He didn't survive. She played footage from their final expedition into the mountains. The camera jostled violently, the lens fogging with condensation. I could make out panicked breathing, someone whispering prayers under their breath. And then, that sound again. A low, rhythmic hum, like hundreds of voices breathing, in unison. The camera turned toward the tunnel, the same one from my dreams, walls lined with carvings of spirals and faces, countless faces, stacked upon each other like a grotesque collage. When the crew reached the end, their lights illuminated the shrine. The figure they called Mother Buddha sat cross-legged, veil hanging loosely from its face. Its hands were enormous, almost human, but with too many joints. The writing across the veil shimmered faintly, as though alive. Yumo whispered off-screen, "We shouldn't be here." The moment they touched the veil, the footage fractured, glitching violently, fragments of frames flickering like broken glass. I caught flashes of faces, dozens, hundreds, morphing, melting, screaming without sound. Then everything went black. When the image returned, only Yumo remained. Her face was spattered with something dark. Her breathing came in sharp, erratic gasps. Behind her, the tunnel pulsed faintly with movement, as if the walls themselves were alive. She turned the camera toward herself. "We saw it," she whispered. "It saw us back." The video ended there, replaced by corrupted data in streaks of red static. For a long time, I sat staring at the screen. I could see my own reflection, pale, hollow-eyed, framed by the faint flicker of the monitor. The hum from the video seemed to linger, a vibration in the bones rather than sound. That was when my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Have you watched them all yet?" I froze. Another message followed immediately after. "It helps if you don't watch alone." I turned off my phone and shut down the computer, but the moment I pulled the plug from the socket, the laptop screen flickered back on by itself. Just for an instant, long enough for me to glimpse Yumo's face again, smiling faintly, lips moving soundlessly, then darkness. For the next few days, I avoided the USB entirely, but avoiding it didn't stop the changes. Every reflective surface in my office, my window, the glass frame on my certificates, even the dark surface of my coffee began to distort slightly. Faces would ripple through them, gone the moment I tried to focus. The dreams worsened too. The tunnel again. Always the tunnel. But now, when I walked toward the girl, I could hear whispering, dozens of voices speaking in a language that scraped against comprehension. And when I woke, there was dirt under my fingernails. On the 7th night, I received another package. No return address, no message, just a single roll of undeveloped 35mm film. I hadn't used a film camera in years, but curiosity won. I developed it myself in my darkroom. The first few frames were ordinary. Temple ruins, mountains, narrow paths through fog. Then came one that made me stop breathing. It was my office, shot from outside the window. The timestamp matched 2 nights earlier, around 3:14 a.m. I was visible inside, asleep at my desk, my head resting on folded arms. And just behind me, barely visible in the darkness, was a figure draped in a veil covered in writing. Mother Buddha. That was when I realized something terrifying. Yumo hadn't sent this to anyone. She'd sent it to me specifically. I was next in the chain. The files weren't a plea for help. They were a contagion, a way to distribute what she'd seen, so it wouldn't consume her alone. And now it was moving on. To me. Even now, I can't stop thinking about that face. Not because I saw it, but because I keep dreaming it. If you've listened this far, maybe you'll dream it too. Maybe that's how it spreads. Either way, thank you for listening, and remember, some doors in Tokyo were sealed for a reason.